connected. No viewers yet. It shouldn't take too long before we got a couple. But yeah, I'll just get started just so anybody who comes across this knows. Today is not a special ASMR episode. I am whispering because I have a throat cold and it hurts to talk. But that's totally fine because we have a very special guest on today who I am incredibly excited to listen to. We're going to be talking about some really, really important things, both specifically in the space of inclusion and diversity, and voting reform, specifically voting science and voting method reform. But I also think a lot of this is going to apply to activism in general. So, like I said, I'm just super pumped, and I think the timing's really great because there's a lot going on in this space right now with voting reform. And so I'm actually just gonna go ahead and pass it off to you, Sarah, to introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me here, Sass. I hope your voice feels better, but it's a perfect example of inclusion and accessibility because here we are not canceling the event because you may be sick. We're able to just have it remotely and everyone can still come. So I'm the executive director for the Equal Vote Coalition. We're a national nonprofit focused on fighting for true equality in the vote itself. And our focus is specifically in voting reform. So the voting method itself, how you fill out your ballot, how you vote, ensuring that the voting method isn't playing favorites, isn't giving some voters an advantage based on who you are, how many candidates you might have on your side, where you live, or any other factor.
Sweet, awesome, yeah. And so I'd actually just kind of love to dive right into the topic. The first question today is, what are some of the issues or almost cultural problems that you currently see in voting science and the voting method reform movement?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start with my own story. My background is, I've been doing all sorts of activism my whole life, but my background was specifically more in sustainability, environmental activism, and sustainable agriculture in particular was where I was before voting reform directly. And so I got involved with my local chapter. I started doing outreach, sending emails, giving presentations. And pretty early on in the process, I came across the field of election science. There are a lot of people out there who have been studying this topic for years. And, I knew a lot about the problem intuitively and through research. I knew a lot about community organizing because of my background. And I thought I knew a lot about just the voting theory of why do we want this voting method? I started out as a ranked choice voting advocate. And so I was, I had my talking points, but it was really a wake up call when I realized a lot of my talking points were kind of oversold. I think a lot of us have been taught, never say always, never say never, unless you can really back it up. And so claims like, what is vote splitting? Does ranked choice voting eliminate vote splitting? And getting into that nitty gritty was required me to do a whole bunch more homework. And I launched into these forums, the Election Science Forum in particular, and Google Group early on. And I pretty quickly realized I was the only female that I could see. I was the only non-programmer as far as I could tell, or pretty much everyone else was male and deeply versed in programming or had a mathematics PhD or a statistics PhD or just clearly had a really technical command of the topic. And so I actually had to do some soul searching to get over my imposter syndrome to be even comfortable chiming in. And there were reasons I wanted to chime in. There was a lot in terms of like the lens of the movement in general that was just focused on like debating this esoteric theory and was really disconnected with the movement on the ground or actually trying to get anything done whatsoever, that I found pretty appalling. It was very like armchair activism, where it's like whether or not this derails what we're doing, we're just debating it because it's a really interesting topic. And I'm a science lover, love science, love debate. So I'm totally get sucked into that as well. And I apologize if I've ever sucked any of you into that, people who are watching. But I felt it was really important to reframe the movement and actually take some of this brilliant science and math, um, some of their findings, distill it down into something actionable and actually put it to use. So that's been really my focus the entire last 5 years that I've been involved, is trying to translate election science into election reform and translate the talking points into something accessible that we can understand, that we can repeat and share. And trying to make it so that other people who launch into this like I did, kind of clueless of how deep the theory side went, don't get scared off and do end up participating. Because I think I'm probably top 99th percentile in terms of stubbornness and not caring what other people think, but not everyone has that skill set.
Yeah, and so you kind of touched on who was there when you joined. Obviously, I think things have changed a little bit, but I think we need to more specifically ask right now, who is being left out?
Yeah. I think a lot of people are being left out. And even in our work, we really early on identified inclusivity and diversity in our volunteer base as a top priority. And we made a point of like sending emails, going out to other groups' events to meet people where they are, and like actively inviting people who weren't represented in our organization to like come to our meeting, come to our mixer, come to our event. And texting people and calling people, not just like sending out a mass blast to whoever and the most passionate people show up or the most comfortable people show up. I think it's really important to do that personalized outreach. But even having done that for years, we still do see really massive disparities in terms of who shows up, with I think the election reform movement being pretty white male dominated, pretty starkly. And even when we do social media outreach, like Facebook targeted ads on our new video, for example, it lets you set, I want to target this video to, marginalized communities, women and people of color, for example. Even when we have done that, the analytics come back that like majority white males watched it. And so I think the problem is going to be difficult to address, and it's going to take a long time. I don't think it's something where it's going to be an easy fix, but that's why it's even more important to be asking these questions right now and brainstorming what we can do, and making sure that all of us, regardless of our preferred method or our organization of choice, that we're all kind of working in tandem to bring people to the table.
Yeah, and just briefly, we talked about this last week, but I want to just hear from you too in the context of this video. Why is it important that we have this diversity and this inclusion?
Well, our movement is about diversity and inclusion. It's about ensuring access to the vote, ensuring good democracy. And democracy is only as good as your electorate. if we don't have all the voters participating, we can't have representative winners. And if we don't have um, everyone who shows up able to cast a vote that's meaningful, a vote that's not wasted, then it's not really democracy. And if people aren't empowered to vote their conscience, it's not really a democracy. So I think historically, these questions have been framed in terms of marginalized political parties, especially. I see a lot of people really passionately coming to the table because they care about two-party domination. They care about representation for the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or the political party of choice that is seen as non-electable. But what we need to realize is that these issues aren't just about political ideologies. They're just as applicable to demographical groups. So if I'm a voter of color in the Democratic Party and I have to strategically vote for the front runner who's the most electable, who is the most electable is always going to be the person who's got the look of a candidate or has the big money or has the establishment backing. So that electability bias directly entrenches implicit bias into our outcomes, and it directly kind of coerces voters into falling in line, or else you risk spoiling the election, throwing the election to your worst case scenario. So it's real high stakes, and it really stops people from being able to be represented, which in turn makes people lose faith in the system altogether, not believe that this is a space where they can be effective or have a voice. And I think the statistic on that is shocking, but almost 50% of Americans at the national level aren't affiliated with either major party. So just in terms of two-party domination, disenfranchised, disillusioned voters, on that metric alone, it's almost half. If we had a system where people believe their vote makes a difference, I think a lot more people would step up and vote. And if people had a voting method that they feel empowers them, I think that would help voter turnout.
Yeah, for sure. And so we've spelled out a lot of problems, why they're problems, why it's important to address them. The next question is how. How do we solve these problems? Or more, and even more specifically, what do we as activists need to change in our behavior or in what we do?
This is a good one, and it's one that we've been looking at specifically as we're looking at like our 6-month plan, our 1-month plan, our next year's plan. But one of the things I'm going to start with is general stuff that I think other people in other spaces beyond our organization should do or should support, is having public forums be moderated and having each other having like a culture of moderating each other. And politics is notorious for being like adversarial and us against them, and you disagree with me and so you're an idiot or whatever. And I see really pervasive like belittling of people who disagree with each other and their intentions across the board, definitely in the election science spaces especially, but also on our social media spaces where we're debating this on Twitter, or we're debating this in Facebook groups. That kind of thing, when I first got involved, was like ubiquitous. And I think we've done a lot of work to sort of create a culture of including training for our volunteers. So if you volunteer with Equal Vote, one of the earlier things that you're going to get is some advice on how to engage with somebody who disagrees with you, not using logical fallacies, not using personal attacks ad hominem, um, trying to identify somebody's why statement. Why are you debating this? Why do you even care about this? Can we find common ground? Can we start with that? Can we identify common goals even? I think all of that is something cultural that we need to do and that we need to train other people to do. And I don't mean just like censorship or banning people who aren't good at it. I mean actually creating a supportive culture that trains each other that this is an expectation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that too because I've sort of asked you this question before in a different space, and you had also mentioned like some other very specific things, like don't use acronyms. I've really tried to take that to heart.
Absolutely.
I have very much tried to give personalized responses to people when they ask questions, and I frame that as this is the work, right? This is what activism, this is what advocacy is, right? This is like, we can't just send people links and expect them to read every word. Like the whole, like the actual job of being an advocate is saying the same things to people over and over and over again, but you actually have to say it. You can't just send them somewhere else that's going to say it. So those are a couple things I've really tried to take into heart. But you've mentioned some other really kind of deeper, more important points too, and I love that.
Yeah, I have a long list of these. I went into depth on one of them, but they're definitely acronyms are a great example. Jargon in general is a great example. Anytime we, I should say, are discussing a complex topic, assume that you're explaining it to somebody who hasn't heard of the terms. So each time you explain a new concept, just summarize it real quick and then go on. Or give an example. And there are lots of ways to do that, to reframe wonky talking points into accessible ones. So when we talk about vote splitting, I think I credit a lot of this to my mom. But when I first started telling her about what I was doing, she was like, what? No, you lost me. Like, every time you say that, I just glaze over. Like, I don't understand. It's overwhelming. It's like stressful and triggering when you say wonky words that I don't understand. And so I just tune out. And I really fought back against that, but she was right, obviously. So like divided and conquered is really the same thing as vote splitting, but everyone's going to know what that means. And there are ways to simplify our talking points and put them in the framings that people already use. So I think there are times and places for framing a conversation your way to make a point, or reframing a conversation that may be framed wrong in the first place, framed inaccessibly. But there's a lot of power in actually framing this conversation from the point of view of your average voter, from your average disenfranchised voter.
Yeah, and you were kind of touching on this a little bit, but my next question is like what's missing? Like, is there a content or accessible content problem? Like, we don't have enough of it, or what do you see going on in that space?
Yeah. So in terms of accessible content, we have really only like scratched the surface of what we want to do, and we have a long list of things that we want to do and have targeted to do. And some of it is a bigger process, like upgrading our website to make the talking points more accessible and less jargony is step one. But then once you've got it all the way you like it, and your messaging is on point, let's translate that into a bunch of languages. Let's translate our core graphics into multiple languages. Um, One thing that we are talking about adding that I think is going to be pretty easy is having a read aloud option at the top of our articles going forward. So right now, if you go to the starvoting.us or the equal.vote websites, those are the two for our project. We have a lot of great articles with really great content, but not everyone has unlimited free time to read long articles. A lot of people have busy day jobs or whatever. And sometimes people have jobs where they can put in earbuds and listen to a podcast. So, putting all of our articles into a listen to this article format, I think is going to do a lot for accessibility for people who, um, have issues visually or just time issues and constraints. Definitely having captioning on videos and graphics is a really important thing. Having more videos, graphics, and infographics are huge for accessibility, just because a picture is worth 1,000 words. Um, Having kind of TLDRs when you have a long, wonky point, kind of have an abstract or summary or here is what my point is close to the top so that people can read that, say, do I already know this? If so, I'll skip to the next thing. Or is this relevant to me? Yeah, I'm curious. This is provocative. Maybe I disagree. I want to hear you out on that. And then, yeah, we definitely have a lot of things like that are just easy upgrades or difficult upgrades that we're planning on doing. And lots of different things. Another one is like, are your graphics colorblind friendly? There's easy online tools to check that, but definitely, especially color coded graphics, I think our first ones for comparing voting methods. If you've ever seen our scorecard, I made it. It was beautiful. I loved it. I shared it. And I got a couple people being like, this makes no sense to me. It just all looks like a field of gray. So we went back and we fixed the colors, and it still looks great to me, but now everyone else can see it.
Yeah, it's a big. I get flack when I make things in blue and yellow. People are like, "Why aren't you using green and red?" I'm like, because there are people who are red-green colorblind. And you're absolutely right. But I know I want to do some of that stuff on my own campaign site. I mean, I've got a lot of text now on there of different policies, but I literally want to have a video at the top of each page of me basically just reading it. But yeah, I know I'm trying to make more accessible content for voting method reform. Once my voice clears up, I have a couple TikTok series I'm going to be releasing. But my next question is, what are some of the most important things that we should keep in mind as activists in this space as we go along? Like, what should we keep at the forefront of what we're thinking about as we go along?
I think it's important to keep the importance of this work at the forefront. I think I mentioned earlier that the problem, the game theory of voting reform, comparing approval, comparing star, comparing rank choice, comparing the vote tabulation, comparing the strategic incentives, all of that is really fascinating from a conceptual perspective. But for a lot of people, these are like life or death problems. If we can't be effective and get better voting methods immediately, there is very real risk that polarization will spiral out of control and contribute to war, contribute to climate change, and contribute to like catastrophic real world problems that we don't have time for. So, as much as we enjoy theorizing for its own sake and math and science for their own sake, that's beautiful. We also need to respect that this is important work and there's work to be done, and we need to really respect each other's time, each other's energy, um, our intentions as we go into this space, because it is profoundly important to millions of people. So try to keep that on the forefront. And also when people get like disillusioned and they're like, oh, I don't know if I'm having a big enough impact. I don't know if, you know, this is fun or whatever. It's like, this isn't about us. It's going to take a lot of us putting in sustained effort, and the results aren't going to be immediately apparent, but that doesn't mean we aren't making a difference and helping get where we're going faster.
Yeah, I definitely, there have been many times where I've like interrupted a conflict between two people, and I'm like, guys, you gotta focus on the bigger picture here. You gotta take a step back. Like, we are on the same side here. We're trying to do the same thing, and like, we gotta stay focused. We gotta keep our priorities in check, and let that guide you instead of falling into this trap that social media wants us to fall into to get more content. And let's focus on the big picture. So yeah, I love that. I think that's really important. And you're very right that voting method reform is right up there at potentially the most important thing if you actually measure it out. It's actually it's
definitely impactful in terms of its impact on social justice, environmental justice, all the justices. And I guess I should say, like, as I'm saying all of these things, I'm not perfect, and none of us are. I'm as guilty as the rest of you of like clicking an angry emoji and scrolling on by with a pithy comment that's like snarky or whatever. But it's something I think, especially in a world that's governed by algorithms that are designed to make us do that, we all need to, check back in every now and then and say, is this really helpful for the movement?
Yeah, and if you want those algorithms to change, it's gonna require voting method reform, just like everything else. Yeah, so I'd actually like to get a little bit topical for a minute. Andrew Yang, Forward Party, he's getting big into voting method reform, prioritizing it, but he's still stuck on ranked choice voting. He's got the Catherine Gell, I would almost call it Catherine Gell syndrome. But I just want to hear your take and what you think about it, and maybe some of the things you've seen, especially this last week. We've seen some pretty interesting things happen.
Yeah, definitely props to organizing Wednesday's Twitter storm. For all of you guys that participated in that, thank you. I think that was a rad action. SAS actually pulled together a couple of different organizations to get behind this thing, and let's all tweet at Andrew Yang as he launches his new book. And he also launched a new political party. And, when people are disenfranchised, they go to third parties. When candidates are disenfranchised, they go to third parties. And I always have mixed feelings, because disenfranchised people who don't feel like they're represented by the current system are 100% of our movement. Those are our people. And we have a two-party system. Two third parties are just marginalized by design. And ranked choice voting feels like a really visceral way to combat that. I was totally excited by the pitch of like, if you rank the candidates, if your first choice can't win, your vote automatically transfers to your second choice. And that's why your vote is never wasted. It's safe to vote your conscience. And ranked choice eliminates the spoiler effect. And the wake-up call for me was when I got fact-checked and I realized all of those claims I just said are false. So ranked choice voting, you rank the candidates first choice, second choice, and so on. Sometimes the number of rankings. Usually the number of candidates you can rank is limited, so you can't rank them all, which can come into play in certain ways if your if your top candidates, none of them are the viable options, then you either have to strategically rank the viable candidates or risk your vote not being able to ever go to one of the front runners. And then if your first choice is not eliminated until later in the rounds of tabulation, then your second choice and third choice might be gone already. I realized that ranked choice voting doesn't count all the rankings. There's actually kind of a small percentage of rankings that ever do get counted. And often, or sometimes we find that especially in competitive races with multiple viable candidates, if you had counted all the rankings, there was a different candidate who was preferred over all others, and a different majority winner who actually had a bigger majority. When people think of majority, we often think there's only one majority possible, but when we have an expressive ballot where we can support multiple good options or multiple good candidates, there's often a majority who prefer pizza and also a majority who prefer Thai food. It's not zero sum anymore once we have an expressive ballot. And so this very real risk of, in a competitive election, having your vote not transfer, having your vote actually be wasted, leads to strategic incentives. It's not necessarily safe to vote for your favorite, to rank your favorite in first choice. In ranked choice voting in a competitive election, but it can backfire, and it can be mathematically worse than if you hadn't voted at all in terms of your own representation. So all of those are things that blew my mind, that launched me into this quest to understand voting methods, to compare them, and to find out, okay, I'm stuck on my pitch. I still want to be able to go out on the street with a clipboard and tell people this better voting method empowers you to vote your conscience, your vote won't be wasted, and it'll accurately elect the candidate who's preferred by the people. You know, the will of the people will prevail. And yeah, so star voting, in my opinion, is that voting method. I don't know if I've mentioned it yet in this interview, but yeah, if you haven't heard of star voting yet, if you're a ranked choice voting fan, definitely check it out. And I think I got on a tangent and didn't answer your original question, so I might need help with that.
What's your take on the Forward Party?
Yeah, so I think that Andrew Yang and Catherine Gale and Rob Ritchie and a number of the leaders right now in the ranked choice voting space are coming from a similar perspective of where I was, where they get excited about this potential, don't really dig into the nitty-gritty details, and then by the time they do, they've actually already got a sunk cost. Rob Ritchie, the executive director of FairVote's been doing this for 30 years. Catherine Gale is pretty new to the space, and she was, I don't think, had ever heard much about star voting until we were on the Nerds for Humanity podcast together. And she actually was like, I really like this. I think I might like it more than ranked choice, maybe. And I don't want to misquote her. That's a total paraphrase. But she seemed open-minded. She was definitely supportive, and asked me to follow up later. So hoping to do that with her. But her big passion is the Final Five primary. And star voting combined with the Final Five would be rad for when we do need a primary. So I think in that case, it might be a yes and. For Andrew Yang, my concern is that he has this sunk cost as well as a political incentive to stick with ranked choice voting. So during his presidential campaign, a lot of the Yang Gang were like, hey, we're all about math, we're all about the science, check out star voting. Yang Gang was falling in love with star voting left and right. Every day, people were joining up, and he was bringing them to the question in the first place about voting methods, and then they were finding star voting and getting excited because that's kind of his whole demographic, is people who want to dig into the science. But he had already publicly taken an opinion. He had put it on his campaign platform, and that means that he's got an issue if he wants to change positions midway. And then as soon as he finished his presidential campaign, he launched into running for mayor of New York City, which had just adopted New York City had just adopted ranked choice and was about to have him run for mayor using ranked choice voting. And that election, in many ways, was a train wreck. It really exhibited exhausted ballots, voter confusion, election officiation snafus and confusion, the whole 9 yards. But Andrew Yang rightfully made a point of being really supportive of alternative voting throughout his campaign there, and not undermining the validity of the election, which I think was important for him to do, especially as a loser, as the candidate who lost. Not to say that he is a loser, sorry, that came out wrong. But I think he took the high road and was supportive of ranked choice in that context, and I think that's really important for him to have done. Historically, places that have repealed ranked choice voting have gone back to first past the post plurality every single time. And if we are gonna point out the issues with ranked choice, I think it's really important that we lead with a solution and say, it's not that we're trying to repeal voting reform. We're not anti-voting reform. Plurality voting in terms of outcomes and strategic incentives is empirically by far the worst. But in terms of a movement, that's where we really get strategic. And so I'm assuming that his new book includes a whole lot of ranked choice voting promotion, just like his.
It does.
His
launch. I haven't read it, but he's been very, very loud about it.
It came out yesterday, but I think he's digging himself in a hole where it's going to become very difficult for him to accept new information or to publicly change his mind. So that's my fear.
Yeah, I was talking to some other supporters about this. I got a couple of them convinced. They were like, okay, you made some really good points. I'm on board, approval and star, absolutely. And they're like, but like, how do we, like, he's stuck in this spot where he's endorsed RCV so heavily, ranked choice voting so heavily. How do we move forward? And I suggested, well, there is a kind of a path, which is ranked choice voting is a misnomer. It's actually supposed to include all voting methods that use ranked ballots, but there's a bajillion ways to tabulate them. Instant runoff happens to be the one that we're using. It also happens to be one of the worst ways to count them. But there are many better ways categorized under Condorcet methods. Right now, Condorcet is a little complicated. I have actually yet to talk to you about this. Something I want to talk to you about. I've been working on hopefully trying to come up with a new presentation, a new Condorcet method, presented in a way without the preference matrix, that is digestible for people and has that ratio of simplicity to accuracy that I think actually could make it viable. And it's something I want to work with some real Condorcet advocates on to say, and with this conversation we've been having about accessible content. And I think if we can come forward with something like that, that could provide a pathway for Andrew Yang to shift toward, well, hey, here's this other checks on it, that could then provide him a path to step aside from instant runoff and toward this other direction that doesn't politically hurt him. And then we could go from there. So that's something when I can talk again, I'd love to talk to you about more. But yeah, I think there is a path forward. Oh.
Good point. Yeah. So ranked choice voting technically means anything with a ranked ballot. And star voting actually counts the votes using the preferences. So it's still a preference voting method, just like all the other ranked choice methods. It's really a hybrid of a ranked and a rated method, because the first round you're counting the scores. That's basic rating. The second round, you're counting the number of voters who preferred each finalist. But there are a lot of different ways to count a ranked ballot. There's some great YouTube videos that are, will make your head spin on all the different ways and the pros and cons. But I think a simple message to Andrew Yang and anyone else who's a supporter of ranked choice voting is that the voting method should count all the data that voters put down. So whatever your ballot data is, count it all. Don't arbitrarily throw away some of it, all of it, any of it. And that's step one of what the Equal Vote requires. Our organization is the Equal Vote Coalition. And what that means is that any way I cast my ballot, you should be able to cast an equal and opposite vote. If the election was tied, I voted, I have really strong, nuanced opinions, you should be able to cast an equal and opposite ballot to bring it back to tied. No matter how many candidates are on my side, no matter how many are on your side, that should be at least possible. And there's two things that are required to make that happen. Number one is you need to be able to weigh in on every candidate, whether it be as simple as approval, where you can approve all the candidates that are good, and not approve all the candidates who aren't. Or with ranked choice, in order to do that, there needs to not be a limit to the number of candidates who can be ranked. You need to be able to weigh in on every candidate. And then the second criteria is that you need to be able to show equal support. If I have a clear majority and there's only one candidate on my side, then I'm definitely going to win. But if I have two candidates who are like equally awesome, my faction's going to be divided between those two and end up divided and conquered. Unless we can say, I prefer both of these guys or gals over, Darth Vader over there. So the ability to give equal rankings is really important, or ratings, depending on the voting method. And those two things together are pretty much the foundation of the equal vote criterion for single winner methods. And it's a pass-fail mathematical axiom where we really promote it as like the minimum bar. There's a lot of voting methods. Most voting methods pass this metric. It's not a cherry-picked criterion that only my method can pass. It's just a basic foundation for what is a fair and equal voting method. And it's encoded directly in our founding documents. One person, one vote means that as near as is practicable, the weight and worth of every citizen's vote should be equal. And I think I might have got that quote spot on, or it might be slightly paraphrased, but that was from a Supreme Court ruling in a Voting Rights Act case from the 60s, I think.
Westbury versus Sanders, 1964.
Thank you. Yeah, this is why I have you around. This is why I need you around. So an equally weighted vote is just that. Any way you vote, I should be able to bring the election back to tied.
Yeah, and so, yeah, that's, we got about 10 minutes left here. here because I know you got a happy hour to get to. But I'm just going to ask you, what is next for the Equal Vote Coalition and the Star Voting Project?
Yeah. Okay. Great questions. So this election cycle is really exciting for me because as a movement, star voting was only invented 5 years ago, going on 6. And so we ran our first campaign for star voting for Multnomah County in 2017. When we started, star voting wasn't named star voting yet. We didn't have a logo. We didn't have a ballot design. We didn't have our talking points wordsmithed. We were absolute beginners with no funding, no organization, and no institutional support because we were really seen as, why do you even exist? We were already trying to solve this. And throughout all the campaigns that we've done, some of which have won or gotten star voting adopted in pretty major spaces. It's now been used at the statewide level for political parties, a couple of them. And it almost passed in the polls. We got 48% of the vote in the city of Eugene with a massively underfunded campaign for something people hadn't heard of at all at the beginning of the campaign, which is pretty impressive. We spent less than a third of the money per capita that they spent to get Fargo to adopt approval voting. So in terms of bang for your buck, we've been crushing it, but we've never been funded, we've never been staffed, and we've never had an organized organization behind this. And so that's what I've been working on for the last 3 years since I've been executive director, is actually laying a foundation to be a viable movement, to be to support campaigns that do crop up so that they don't have to bootstrap it like we did the first round. And we just hired staff for the first time. They haven't even been on board for a month yet, but we have a new outreach coordinator, Bobby Benavides, who's been doing amazing work already, has already been presenting to the city and outreaching to organizations. We have a new fundraising coordinator, Jane, who's doing great work and has already put together a whole fundraising plan. If you've donated to the Equal Vote in the past and didn't get a handwritten thank you letter, I apologize profoundly, but we actually are gonna let you know that we appreciate you going forward because we're gonna have the bandwidth to do that. And we have a new admin assistant. So for all the people who have emailed me and not gotten an immediate reply to your important action item that you want to do to help, this has been a catastrophic issue for years. People want to help, and we don't have the bandwidth to find people action items or to help get people set up for leadership. That all is changing because we have an admin assistant, we have project management assistants. And in terms of our capacity to scale as a movement, I think we just leveled up incredibly. So I'm really excited about that. We have campaigns in the works around the country. Some of them, one of them is a ballot initiative campaign in the city of Troutdale that we just relaunched, but signature gathering right now is still a bit iffy. That one has a brand new clock. We have 2 years to get the signatures. But we're definitely also looking at referrals and using legislative processes and inside avenues to get things on the ballot without a signature gathering process. Hopefully COVID will get better, but we're definitely going to strike or going to pursue multiple angles and not put all our eggs in one basket right now. And it's really grassroots led. So where we have an amazing chapter of people that are making things happen is where we're going to put our bandwidth and support that.
Yeah, and I mean, there are cool groups starting up in California. I know a bunch of people in Massachusetts who just started I know Adam in North Carolina. One of the interesting things about the North Carolina chapter is I think they're looking at both star voting and approval voting right now to figure out which one they should pursue. And I think this is just in our last few minutes here something I think is really, really important to recognize is that there are two different organizations here. There's the Equal Vote Coalition and there's the Star Voting Project.
Right.
And so I'd love for you to kind of highlight why they're different, what's different about them, and just talk about maybe more specific, maybe broader with the Equal Vote Coalition and other voting methods, and what kind of the attitude is with that, and how the approach is going to be.
Yeah. So, star voting is our proposal. It's our champion. It's our candidate, so to speak. You score candidates up to 5 stars, from 0 up to 5, like a 5-star rating. And the 2 highest scoring candidates are finalists. Your vote goes to the finalist you preferred. So it's a simple, expressive 2-round process. You only have to vote once. That dramatically addresses all of these deep inequities and issues with our current system and with some previous proposals as well. So if people are going to go away from my 20-second pitch with one thing that they remember, I hope it's star voting. Whether or not you remember the details of why or what, remember star voting, look it up, get excited about it. And so that's why we've put star voting as a project first. Now, Star Voting Action is a 501c4 nonprofit. So that's empowered to fundraise and support political campaigns in general. We're able to really do the groundwork to be able to support a campaign before it exists, and then channel those resources to that campaign as needed. And that's pretty groundbreaking, and that's led by a board of directors. And then a separate organization, it's a little bit of a Venn diagram, but the Equal Vote Coalition is older than Star Voting. It was founded before Star Voting was invented. It's part of the reason Star Vote, or part of the landscape in which Star Voting was invented. And the Equal Vote Coalition is all about fighting for true equality in the vote itself, like I led with. And so we support equal voting methods, and we've recently kind of reframed our mission to differentiate equal vote from star voting. I think now that we have the bandwidth to do so. And our framing is whether you prefer a simple traditional looking ballot with just one bubble, whether you prefer a ranked ballot, if you prefer a 5-star ballot, no matter which ballot you prefer, you can have an equal vote. So we support approval voting for people who want a really simple ballot. We support Condorcet voting, which is you rank the candidates and the candidate preferred over all others wins. So Condorcet is a great ranked choice option for people like Yang who don't want to change their talking points at all, but want to have maybe a shorter, simpler, more sexy and more fact-checked pitch. And we support star voting because it maximizes our 5 pillars of what a good voting method looks like. So our 5 pillars are that a voting method should be simple for voters, for election officials, for auditing, all of the above, transparent. Simplicity, it should also be expressive. You should be able to express your preference order and also your level of support. Is my second choice just as good as my favorite, or is my second choice a lesser evil? That's relevant data. The more expressive within the confines of cognitive load, the best. And a voting method should be equal. It should not play favorites. Every voter should have as much power as any other voter. It should be accurate. It should accurately get representative results. And it should be honest, which is to say I should be empowered to be honest. casting an honest, expressive vote that just simply reflects my honest perspective on the candidates should be a safe vote. It should be safe to vote your conscience. So star voting, we feel, best maximizes those 5 pillars, but we do respect that different people are going to have different considerations. Different local areas are going to have their own considerations and their own, varying degrees of how important are each of those. Do I need something as simple as humanly possible, even if it's not as accurate as I would like? You know, I think there's valid reasons to choose approval voting, Condorcet, or star, but Equal Vote is really trying to build that coalition between the voting reform movement factions and really say, here's some options that deliver on all of our goals. Let's work together and get it done.
Sweet. Thank you so much for coming on today, Sarah, and for helping me to save my voice a little bit. I'm glad you got to say so many things. I feel like this video contains a lot of really great information for people all across the voting method reform space. It's going to be available on YouTube for free. Anybody can use it, share it, clip it, whatever. Plus my other platforms that I have. But thank you again. This has been so fantastic, and I absolutely look forward to working with you more in the future on voting method reform.
Yeah, always a pleasure. It's fantastic to have you on the scene asking these questions, and I hope everyone else is asking these questions too, and we'll get better.
Sweet. All right, and I'm going to go